Greetings, YouTube. The doctor is in, and today we're talking about the spell Suggestion. It is a second level, so this used to be a third level spell in previous editions, but in 5th edition they've made it a second level spell. So today we're going to talk about this on the Doctor Spell Prognosis installment, and we are not giving this spell an A, we're giving this spell an A-. Now, it is usable by Bards, Sorcerers, Warlocks, Wizards, Knowledge Domain Clerics. So it's usable by a bunch of different spellcasting classes. And as I said, it is a second level spell. It does require concentration, and this is a spell that you do want to concentrate on. It only takes one action to cast. It has a range of 30 feet, which isn't the greatest range in the world. And it does have a verbal and somatic, verbal and material component. It lasts for 8 hours. And that's a really long time. And because of the duration, you really want this to last as long as you can possibly get it to go towards that 8-hour mark. So you suggest a course of activity limited to a sentence or two, which means you can have 2 sentences. You can write really, really, really long sentences. I very much suggest that if players are going to use this spell, or DMs are going to use this spell often, that you sit down and you think of scenarios that you're going to use this spell with, and you write out the suggestions beforehand. And that way you can pull them out. You don't waste a bunch of time at the table thinking about what you're going to do. You pull out that, those pre-written suggestions, and you go from there. And I've got several characters who have this spell that I do that with. So they have to hear you and they have to understand you. So you have to remember that limit to this, and that does play into my one of the reasons I'm giving this an A- and not an A. Creatures that cannot be charmed are not affected by this. So there's a lot of undead that are not affected by this. You have to understand that too. And it must be worded in such a manner as to make the course of action sound reasonable. Now there's a sentence after this that says what is not reasonable. So, asking the creature to stab itself. To me, that means if you're asking the creature to harm itself, it's not going to do that, and the spell will end. Throw itself on a spear, which is almost this. I don't know why they put that in there, but it's very similar to stabbing itself. Immolate oneself, setting oneself on fire. Diving into a volcano, diving into a pool of lava. Those are things that are harmful and will end the spell. Or do some other obviously harmful acts. They all end the spell. So you have to word this extremely carefully so that the targeted creature is not going to be an effect that is going to be unreasonable. So they make a wisdom save, which is one of the 3 great ones. So intelligence is probably the one you want the most. Most creatures don't have a really super high intelligence, followed by the charisma, and then wisdom for the mental saving throws. But most creatures don't have a high wisdom score. On a failed save, the targeted creature pursues the course of action you described to the best of its ability. So, attacking its allies because you've suggested that they're not their allies anymore isn't necessarily harmful. Could be unreasonable, but if you word the suggestion correctly, then to make it sound not unreasonable, then that could happen. So if you have an opponent creature that you're targeting who is a paid mercenary, say, then suggesting that you're going to pay them more and that their allies are now their enemies wouldn't be out of the realm of possibilities, I would say. There's a lot of interpretation of this spell. This spell is a combat-ending spell, but it ends combat in a way that usually results in not completely defeating a creature, the targeted creature. So, if the suggested activity can be completed in a shorter time, the spell ends when the subject finishes what it was asked to do. So if you give it something to do, so for instance, defeat, my enemies, then once they're defeated, the spell ends, and then you got to deal with this targeted creature because now they're no longer under your control. You can also specify conditions that will trigger a special activity during the duration. Now, this has to be part of one of two sentences. So the example they give here is that you might suggest a knight give the knight's war horse to the first beggar that the knight meets. And so there's all kinds of you could say, you have discovered religion, and as part of that religion have decided to take a vow of poverty. Leave all your things here and go on a pilgrimage to this city, which could be 2 days away. And if the creature fails, it's going to dump all of its stuff, and it's going to walk to that city and think it's going on a pilgrimage. And it's going to do that for 8 hours because you told it to go someplace that's farther than 8 hours. You get all the creature's stuff that way, but you still have to deal with the creature once the spell ends because that enemy creature now knows that it was charmed and it's out in the middle of nowhere, none of its stuff, and it probably wants to get its stuff back. So if I would say one of the other good uses of this spell is if the party is in a jam and you're about ready to all go down and die, then this is a good one to pull out to end the combat very quickly so you can retreat and regroup and fight again another day. All right, that's what I got for everybody today. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I will catch everybody later.